Section 0 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Deb K. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Preface. A letter to you. Dear, write your own name here. Before you read this little book, Dr. Lori says I must tell you that the stars are not always in the same place in the sky. If you are not acquainted with them, it is easier to find them when they are just coming up in the east. So under the name of each group of stars, you will find the best time of year to look for it. In the winter, I always had my lessons at 7 o'clock, but after April, it was so light that we changed the time to 8 o'clock. Since then, there is a new plan to save daylight. So from April to October, while this plan lasts, you will have to go out at 9 o'clock on the dates printed with each lesson. Dr. Lori laughed when he found that his pictures were going into a real astronomy book, and said if he had known this, he would have been more particular. But I have been able to learn the stars from them very easily. As soon as you find a constellation, write the date on the dotted line under its picture. Then you will know when you have earned your diploma. I hope you will have as good a time as I did, finding the 15 constellations. Your little friend, Helen. End of Preface. A letter to you. Recording by Deb K. Section 1 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Deb K. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. The Two Dippers. Look for the dippers early in November. Dr. Lori had solemnly promised Helen that when she grew strong enough to go out into the yard at 7 o'clock, he would come up on purpose to point out some of the most beautiful stars, and teach her their names. Night after night Helen had tossed in her white bed by the window. It was only when the kind nurse had pushed the shade up, slip, slip, creak, creak, and let Helen look out at the wonderful starry sky that she had been able to rest at all. And now here she was down in the hall, dressed warmly from the top of her brown fur hat with its scarlet rose to her brown fur leggings, waiting for the big burly doctor to keep his promise. And he kept it. He came chugging up in his long gray car, looking like a bear in his fur coat. "Only 15 minutes, sister," he said to Helen. "We mustn't take cold. We will go out to the garden path and face north, to get a view of the Big Dipper. No course of lectures is complete without the Big Dipper to start from." "Please let it be a course of lectures," begged Helen. "Very well," agreed Dr. Lori, good-naturedly. "Now let's just take a look at this." He turned a tiny flashlight on a black card with white stars dotted on it in the shape of the Dipper. "The Dipper is right side up, right above those trees. 4 stars make the bowl, and 3 the long handle." "I see," cried Helen. "Now," continued the doctor, "the 2 stars through which the arrow was drawn are called pointers, because they point almost to the North Star. Do you see it? A very faint star?" "Yes," cried Helen again, "and it is the very tail of the Little Dipper's handles, exactly like the picture." "Good," said Dr. Lori, very much pleased. "You have sharp enough eyes to see little Alcor, I think. If a person can see Alcor, he has very good eyes. Look in the handle of the Big Dipper, directly above the first star from the end. Alcor is the rider, and the bright star below it is his horse." "I see both," said Helen. "My eyes are all right." "Good. Now we must go in." Helen went very obediently. "How different the stars look when I'm outdoors," she said. But when she was lying in bed again, looking out at the starry sky, the Big Dipper already seemed like a dear old friend. End of The Two Dippers. Section 2 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Deb K. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Auriga, the Wagoner. Look for Auriga during the middle of November. "Do come in just a minute, Dr. Lori, and see what I've made," begged Helen the second night the doctor came to tell her about the stars. Dr. Lori put on his eyeglasses and sat down near the library lamp to look at the small blue book Helen handed to him. It was made of 6 squares of black paper pasted on larger white cards. On the first square Helen had drawn the dippers in white ink, and underneath the card she had written all she had learned about them. On the blue cover in large white letters was printed, "My Star Book." "That's a fine idea," exclaimed the doctor. "I wish every little girl in the United States had one. Tonight we'll learn a group of stars that will be harder to draw. It is called Auriga, or the Wagoner." We'll go to the same place to see it, and face north." When they found the Big Dipper, Dr. Lorry said, "Now, instead of using the 2 real pointers to find Auriga, just imagine that the 2 top stars of the bowl are pointing east, or to the right. You see they point out a very, very bright star, the only bright one anywhere near?" "Yes," answered Helen. "Brighter than even the Dipper?" "Yes, a star of the first magnitude, we say, meaning brightness. Now see what we are to look for." This time the flashlight showed a large figure made of 5 stars, one of which was a very bright star. When the light was turned away, Helen looked up into the darkness and saw the exact copy of the little drawing smiling down upon her, only so very large and grand. The bright star is named Capella, the goat. Playing near her are the 3 little kids. Helen skipped with pleasure when she found them. "This is a prettier group than the Dipper. A prettier constellation, we say," said the doctor, smiling and leading the way back to the house. End of Auriga the Wagoner. Section 3 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Deb Kay. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Taurus, the Bull. You can see this during December. "The moon is so bright we can't see the stars well now," Dr. Lorry had telephoned, and it seemed a long time to Helen before they stood once more looking up the bright Capella, now much higher up in the sky. "Helen, what color is Capella?" asked Dr. Lorry. "White," answered Helen. "All the stars are white." "Ahem," said the doctor. "Are they, though? Suppose you draw a line through Capella and the 3 kids until it comes to that very bright star in the east. What color's that?" "Why, red," said Helen, in astonishment. "Red is correct," said the doctor. "We have yellow ones, green ones, blue ones." "Blue ones?" "Bluish, we say," smiled her companion. "That red star is called Aldebaran, or the bull's eye, because it forms the eye in the constellation of Taurus, the bull. You see it is in that V-shaped figure? That is the bull's face." "I don't think it looks much like a bull's face," said Helen, after a moment. "Neither do I," agreed the doctor. "All these names were made up about 3,000 years ago, you see. Perhaps if we were naming the constellations, we might do it differently. Now, just a little higher up, do you see a tiny bunch of stars?" "Yes, 3, 4, 5 tiny ones." Dr. Lorry was silent. 6, 7, cried Helen after a moment. "Bright eyes," said the doctor. "I see 7 too. They are called the Pleiades, or sometimes the 7 sisters. You'll find the Pleiades mentioned in the Bible. Now see if you can find where before I come again." End of Taurus the Bull. Section 4 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Deb Kay. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Orion. Orion can best be seen early in January. Helen had her book all ready in the hall to show the doctor, the bull carefully drawn, Aldebaran tinted a rosy red, and the Pleiades shining in their places like tiny jewels. Underneath she had written, "That maketh the Bear, Orion, and Pleiades, and the chambers of the south." Job chapter 9, verse 9. "Canst thou bind the cluster of the Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion?" Job chapter 38, verse 31. "Mother helped me find the verses," explained Helen, "but I really don't understand them." "Orion is the constellation we have tonight," said Dr. Lorry, opening the front door. "This time we will face east. See our old friends Auriga, Taurus, and the Pleiades? Now we will add to them the Orion, the giant hunter. Here is his picture." The black card showed a figure somewhat the shape of Auriga, only a belt of 3 large stars went across the middle. Then Helen gazed upwards. "I see a square of bright stars that I always used to call the Little Dipper," said Helen. "Oh-ho!" said the doctor. "You're looking for something too small. Orion himself is much, much larger. That is only his belt and sword. His shoulders and head are above, and his feet—" "Oh, so large!" interrupted Helen. "And he is bright, isn't he?" "I guess you see him," said the doctor. "He is the most beautiful constellation we have. The 3 bright stars make his belt, and his sword is stuck through his belt. In the handle of his sword is a hazy cloud called the Great Nebula. Now, just throw back your head and look at all these stars at once, and see if you can imagine any one great enough to make Orion and the Pleiades and those great open spaces over in the southern sky. We couldn't string those 7 stars of the Pleiades on a chain of fire. Could you break up Orion and let those wonderful stars wander around through the sky?" "Why, those are my verses," said Helen, in surprise. "How easy!" "Just a minute," said the doctor suddenly, turning around once more before they went in. "What color would you call Rigel, Orion's left foot?" "Blue," said Helen. End of Orion. Section 5 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Deb Kay. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Gemini, the Twins. Look for this during the middle of January. "We will find the twins, Castor and Pollux, tonight," said Dr. Lorry, guiding Helen along the dark path. "They are rather hard to point out, but once you see the picture—" He fumbled in his pocket for his little black card and light. "Castor is a bright star, perfectly white, and Pollux is a little brighter star, as yellow as gold. To help you find them, I will say there is a spelling match up in the sky just below Auriga and just at the left of Orion, and Castor and Pollux are choosing sides. Castor has 2 stars on his side, and Pollux has 3. Helen laughed, put her hand over the light, and looked up to hunt for the 2 lines of spellers. She soon found them. "For Orion is pointing right at them," she said. "This lesson is so short, I want to show you something else. Do you see a faint silvery band crossing the sky, passing through Auriga and very near Gemini? It is made of so many millions of stars, and they are so far away that it looks milky. It is called the Milky Way. You can study it with your opera glasses, and find many clusters and drifts of stars in it, to keep you from getting impatient for your next lesson." End of Gemini, the Twins. Section 6 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Deb Kay. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Canis Major, the Great Dog. You will find this early in February. "Orion has a great hunting dog," said Dr. Lorry, as if he were going to tell a story, "and he is forever chasing a rabbit. He never catches it, and he is always after it. He runs so fast that he is standing on his hind legs all the time, his tail sticking out straight, and his front feet in the air. His nose is the very brightest star in the sky. Here he is." The black card showed the picture of the great dog. "Now look up behind Orion, just coming up over the hill. Sirius's nose is called the Dog Star, and when it rises with the sun, we say dog days have come." "Where is the rabbit?" asked Helen. "Right under Orion's feet," answered the doctor. "Can you see a rough square with 3 stars curved over it, for the rabbit's back? 4 very faint stars on the right are the rabbit's ears." "I think Rigel and Sirius are the prettiest stars I know," said Helen. "You did well to remember Rigel's name," said Dr. Lorry, looking surprised. "Well, you see," explained Helen timidly, "I come out nearly every night with Mother, and I point out all the things I learned to Edith and Donald. Of course I don't know very much about the stars, but they love to hear it." "Good," said the doctor. "Now I don't know very much about the stars, but I learn more when I tell you, and you learn more when you tell Edith and Donald. You might even let them copy your book." "I have," said Helen, laughing. End of Canis Major, the Great Dog.
Section 7 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Leo the Lion. Look for Leo late in March. One day, Dr. Lorry had a telephone call. "Do you want your grass cut?" asked a small, eager voice. "My grass cut? Why, it's not up yet. Grass doesn't come up until April, young lady." "Well, anyway, I found something in the sky that looks like a sickle," explained Helen. "You know, one of those curved knives we cut grass with." "Have you, indeed?" cried Dr. Lorry. "I'll be over tonight, then, as soon as it's dark, and take a star lesson from you." And actually, when Dr. Lorry ran up the front steps, the little teacher was ready for her pupil with a black card bearing the picture of a beautiful star sickle. "That's fine," said the doctor, following Helen out into the garden. "And it's one of the few constellations that really looks like its name. Ah, there it is." "What is the first magnitude star in the handle?" asked Helen mischievously. "First magnitude," echoed Dr. Lorry. "You're a good pupil. Well, that is Regulus. This constellation is sometimes called Leo, the lion, as well as the sickle, and Regulus is the lion's heart. You couldn't possibly mistake Leo, could you? Said Helen. Not if you look directly east during the last of March at 7 o'clock, at the constellation just coming up, laughed Dr. Lorry. There is one more interesting thing about Leo. There is a shower of meteors near Leo, called the Leonids, every November, from the 10th to the 15th. They are bluish and very swift. Oh, do let's watch next November, Helen said. Let's wait until 1932, suggested Dr. Lorry, because they are magnificent every 33 years, and it wouldn't do to sit up until after midnight very often. I'll see you then in 1932, said Helen. End of Leo the Lion.
Section 8 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Twinkle. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Section 8. Boötes the Herdsman. Look for this the last part of April. The very first thing you must learn about our new constellation, began Dr. Lorry, glancing at the sky, is to pronounce its name correctly. Boötes is pronounced Bo-O-Tes, and the next thing is to see his picture, went on the doctor, bringing out his card. It looks like a kite, said Helen. Yes, and the way to find it is to look at the Big Dipper, using the 2 top stars as pointers, and the following to the right or east, until you come to a big, reddish-yellow star, said Helen. Yes, said the doctor, looking up at the big star. Do you see it? Its name is Arcturus, and it is mentioned in the Bible, so it is pretty old. Boötes is the herdsman, and Arcturus is his right knee. Let's call it a kite, said Helen. Very well, agreed Dr. Lorry. Only don't let anyone think he is anything but a herdsman. He is very much easier to find if you look for a kite, however. Do you notice how light it is now at 7? asked Helen. Perhaps next time I had better wait until 8 o'clock, suggested the doctor. It is almost too bright to see the stars at all. I love to learn the stars, said Helen. I can find all those that I learned first, even if they are farther toward the west, because I've watched them. See, Orion is just setting, and Gemini and Auriga are just above, and Sirius will soon be out of sight at night. Keep it up, Helen, was all Dr. Lorry said. End of Section 8.
Section 9 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Corona, the Northern Crown. You can find the crown early in May. The constellation this time is one that I like myself, said Dr. Lorry, fanning himself with his straw hat. It is Corona, or the Northern Crown. Down in South America and Australia, you can see the Southern Crown. Do you mean there are stars we can't ever see up here in New England? Yes, indeed, replied Dr. Lorry. There is another whole set of constellations to learn when we move south. Now, just see on the diagram where Corona is, just beside Boötes. The middle star of the crown is the brightest one, just as it should be. Oh, that is so easy, said Helen, immediately finding the beautiful crown in the dark blue sky. That bright star's name is Gemma, the pearl, said the doctor. I shouldn't say that Gemma was a first magnitude star, should you? asked Helen. Just what magnitude would you say Gemma was? Inquired Dr. Lorry. Second, guessed Helen. Right, as usual, said the doctor. Now let me see if you can find another star without a picture. It is Spica, the brightest star in Virgo. Most of the stars in Virgo are faint, but Spica is very bright. Begin with the star in the crown nearest Bootes, and draw a line with your eye through Arcturus, and you almost strike that pure white star in the southern sky. I see it, cried Helen. Spica is the ear of corn, which the Virgin is holding in her left hand, explained Dr. Lorry. Spica and Regulus look alike, said Helen. So they do, said the doctor. End of Corona the Northern Crown.
Section 10 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Twinkle. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Section 10. Lyra the Liar. Look for this in early June. I'm sorry to send this young lady to the beach, said Dr. Lorry to Helen's mother, as they stood in the garden. I shall miss these lessons myself, but I think the seashore will do more for Helen than school. I shall miss my star lessons more than school, cried Helen. I'll tell you a beautiful plan. Why can't I pick out some stars at the beach and send them to you to find out their names? That will be very fine, said the doctor heartily. I will teach you just this one before you go. It will be Lyra the Liar. Look up in the northeastern sky, and see if you can pick out this musical instrument. That bright star at the top is Vega. That is easy to find, because there isn't any other bright star in this part of the sky, said Helen. Vega is more than 10 million times as far from us as the sun is, went on the doctor. And Chiliac, which is named on the diagram, often changes its brightness. Sometimes it is 4th magnitude, sometimes as bright as 3rd. We call such a star a variable. How queer, said Helen. Many things are wonderful about the sky, said Dr. Lorry, flashing his pocket light on the black card. I have drawn a meteor on this diagram. This is a rather large meteor, to show you how they look. We call them shooting stars sometimes, and I want you to notice them at the beach. How do you find one? Said Helen. You just watch, explained Dr. Lorry, until you see one. You are sure to see one if you watch long enough. Sometimes a piece of one strikes the earth, and we call these pieces meteorites. They are made of metal, which has been melted and cooled very rapidly. I wish I could find one, said Helen. Anyway, I'll write to you soon after I get to the seashore. End of section 10. Section 11 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Twinkle. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Section 11. Cygnus the Swan. The swan is visible early in July. To tell the truth, the hotel at the beach was rather lonesome when Helen and her mother went down in June. But after a hot week or two, more people came. One evening, just before Helen went upstairs to bed, she sat with her elbows on the piazza railing, looking up at the sky. See, Mother, there is Lyra, way up high. And what do you know about Lyra? Asked a puzzled voice beside her. She turned to see a young man, who had arrived that day, in the next chair. "She is learning the constellations," explained Helen's mother, "and we're trying to pick out a new one to send home to your teacher to find out its name." "Good," said the young man heartily. "Does she know Cygnus the Swan?" "Oh, no," said Helen. "Wouldn't it be great fun if I could really learn one and surprise the doctor? Do you know about the stars?" "Just a little," said the young man. "I can show you the Swan. Do you see where the Milky Way divides itself? See a large perfect cross at the left, with one brighter star at the top?" said Helen. "Yes, that is Deneb, the swan's tail. Do you know what the Milky Way is?" "It is thousands of faint stars," said Helen timidly. "Yes, and there is a place in the Swan where these faint stars stop. See, just left of the middle star, that is the coal sack. Then, just below Cygnus, is a tiny diamond of 4 stars. That is Delphinus the dolphin." "Isn't that cunning?" said Helen. "Won't the doctor be surprised? Thank you ever so much for telling me. And will you show me another sometime?" "Surely," said the young man, smiling to himself. End of section 11.
Section 12 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Scorpio. Look for this late in July. Dear Dr. Lorry, wrote Helen, I knew you'd be awfully surprised to hear that I had found out the name of the swan. And the way we found out was this. A man here offered to teach me, and Mother happened to find out that he really is a star professor at the big college in New York. He takes a lot of pains with me. Last night he took our steamer chairs off the piazza down to the sand. It is so much more comfortable, and you can see so much better leaning back. It doesn't make your neck ache, either. He taught us the scorpion this time. I really think it looks like a scorpion, with its tail curled over its back. He says a good way to find Scorpio is to face south, and the handle of the dipper points to it. But if you face south, you can hardly miss it, as Antares, the scorpion's heart, is so very bright and red. When I first looked at Antares, it looked red, but after the professor called my attention to its color, I saw it was bright green, too. It is a funny color, but very pretty. My favorite stars, so far, are Regulus, Vega, Antares, and Rigel. You didn't expect I'd remember Rigel, did you? How do you like me for a teacher? Your little friend, Helen. End of Scorpio.
Section 13 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Deb Kay. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Sagittarius, the Archer. Wait until the last of August for this. I think the Archer is up high enough tonight for us to study, said Helen's star friend, settling the 3 steamer chairs in a row on the sand. Just at the left of the Scorpion, you will see a figure that looks like the Big Dipper, upside down. Oh, almost exactly like the Dipper, cried Helen. That is it, agreed the young man. It is called the Milk Dipper. The other must be a Water Dipper. Now this is one part of Sagittarius. The other part represents a bow and arrow. The 3 stars in a curved line make the bow. And doesn't the star at the right make the arrow? asked Helen. Exactly right, exclaimed Helen's teacher. Perhaps you had better letter the bow A, B, C when you send the drawing to Dr. Lorry, and the tip of the arrow D. Just then a tiny star shot rapidly across the sky. "A shooting star!" cried Helen. "Did you see it?" "Yes," said her friend. "You see, this one was so bright it left a faint streak behind it. I'm glad we happened to see it. Dr. Lorry said I would see one if I watched long enough." "That is a wonderful sight," said Helen's mother. "I have learned as much as Helen during these lessons, and I am sorry that we have to go home this week." "And I shall be sorry to lose such an apt pupil," said the professor, with a low bow. End of Sagittarius. Recording by Deb K. Section 14 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Deb K. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. The Square of Pegasus, the Triangle, and Aries the Ram. These will be visible late in September. "I am glad to be back in my own garden again," said Helen, skipping down the path. "We had a beautiful time at the beach, but I feel more at home here." "So do I," agreed Dr. Lorry comfortably, "although Mr. Star Professor knows a lot more than I do." "He isn't a bit more interesting, though," declared Helen. "Well, in return for that compliment, I'll give you a very easy lesson. Face east, and look for a very large, perfect square." "That is easy. They are such bright stars," said Helen promptly. "Now, this is called the winged horse," went on the doctor. "I don't see how it can be," said Helen. "Well, he is on his back, and his feet are up in the air. Up in the sky, I should say." "I see what might be called feet," replied Helen. "It isn't necessary to pick them out," said Dr. Lorry. "Just look inside the square before I come again, and count every star you can within the square." "Oh, that will be fun," agreed Helen. "Now, just below the great square is a perfect triangle, called the Triangle." "I see that it looks like its name," said Helen. "Just below that is Aries, the Ram, made up of 3 stars. Although Aries is quite small, it is very important. You must be sure to remember it. The right-hand star is the first double star ever seen. Through a telescope, it looks like 2 stars close together. Now, do you think you can remember 3 constellations in one night?" "Of course," laughed Helen. End of The Square of Pegasus, the Triangle, and Aries the Ram. Recording by Deb K. Section 15 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Deb K. Cassiopeia's Chair. Look for the chair late in October. "For this constellation we would like those steamer chairs you had at the beach," said Dr. Lorry. "Come, we'll sit in the front seat of my car and lean back." "How pretty the Milky Way is tonight," said Helen. "Yes, and Cassiopeia's chair lies almost wholly in the Milky Way. We are facing north. The chair is halfway between the Great Square and the Big Dipper, and looks like a W upside down. See its picture first. You see I have lettered the stars A, B, C, D, and E. The back is formed by A, B, and C, the seat by C and D, and the front leg by D and E. Cassiopeia herself is nowhere to be seen." "I see the chair beautifully," said Helen. "You can see it at some hour of every pleasant night," said Dr. Lorry. "Hello! What do I see coming up in the east?" Oh!" cried Helen. "It's Auriga! And I see Capella, the goat, and the 3 little kids." "What a good memory you have," said Dr. Lorry, greatly pleased. "You see, we've made the rounds of the sky. We haven't learned every constellation, but we know 15 of the brightest ones." "I see the Pleiades and Taurus!" cried Helen. "Good!" shouted Dr. Lorry, who had been hoping Helen would discover them. "This week I counted 25 stars inside the Square of Pegasus," added Helen. "That is good, too, because it is possible to see only 30. Now we must go in. When you think you are forgetting these constellations, just try to teach them to somebody else. I think," ended the doctor with a twinkle, "that during these lessons I have learned as much as anyone." End of Cassiopeia's Chair. Recording by Deb K.
Section 16 of Star Stories for Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kangaroo. Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner. The Planets. One January night, Helen stood in her window before going to bed, looking out at the stars. As she gazed at Castor and Pollux, she saw a bright star between the two lines of spellers in the spelling match, which she could not remember seeing before. To make sure, she found her little book and looked at the picture of Gemini. There was no star like it on the chart. I will call up Dr. Lorry and tell him, decided Helen. Aha, said Dr. Lorry over the telephone, greatly pleased that Helen had noticed the star. If you haven't gone to bed, I will come over and give you a new lesson, for that is a planet which you have found, and not a star at all. Helen was delighted, and soon the two astronomers were out in the garden. Now, the 15 constellations we have learned, began the doctor, are made up of fixed stars. That is, the stars don't go wandering about without regard for each other. This is why the Dipper always looks like a dipper to us. But the planets follow the pathway of the sun, which leads right through the middle of some of the constellations that you know. How can you tell a planet from a star? Asked Helen. The stars twinkle, replied Dr. Lorry. The planets glow with a steady light. There are only 4 planets that you are likely to see, which I will give you in the order of their brilliancy. They are Venus, Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn. The first 2 are white, Mars is red, and Saturn is that greenish yellow which you see up there in Gemini. If you will get me your book, I will write out the things you need to know about the planets. The 2 stargazers went into the library. And this is what Dr. Lorry wrote in Helen's book. 1. Sometimes you will see a bright star in a constellation which is not on the chart. 2. If it does not twinkle, this will be a planet. 3. If it is red, it is Mars. 4. If it is very bright in the west, just after sunset, it is Venus. 5. If it is in the east or overhead, or in the west, more than 3 hours after sunset, it is Jupiter. 6. If it is not very bright and is greenish yellow, then it is Saturn. 7. There are only 6 constellations in this book in which a planet can appear. They are Taurus, Gemini, Leo, Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Aries. As the doctor finished the list, he drew from his pocket a roll tied with bright blue ribbons. Seeing you have so nearly finished your lection course, I brought along your diploma, he said. When you have found the 4 planets, you can write your name on the dotted line in your best style. Oh, with fancy scrolls and flourishes, cried Helen, unrolling the heavy paper. This was the diploma. This is to certify that blank has learned 15 constellations and 4 planets, and is fully qualified to enjoy the oldest and least known of all nature studies. And before the year was out, Helen's name stood on the dotted line, scrolls, flourishes, and all. So when the time comes, you, little reader, may put your name there, too. End of Section 16. Recording by Kangaroo. End of Star Stories for Little Folks by Gertrude Chandler Warner.